I was off of work this night and relaxing at home. My roommate was out of town for a couple of days, visiting his parents, and I was somewhat of a night owl, so I enjoyed staying up late. It was around 12, and I was sipping on a beer while watching TV, when a faint sound came from above me. At first, I didn't even process it, like my body just ignored it. But after a few seconds, it kind of hit me as I realized it couldn't have been my roommate, like it usually would have been. I looked up at the ceiling and muted the TV to try and listen for it again. A few seconds went by, and there was nothing. The sound was so soft though, and with the TV being on when I heard it, I really had no idea what it could have been, or even where upstairs it came from. Although this sounds pretty dumb of me, I really didn't feel like getting up, and wasn't worried enough about it to feel the need to check it out. I opened the mini fridge I had next to the couch and grabbed another beer, cracking it open and taking a few sips to get back to relaxing. But before I could even unmute the TV, I heard that same thump sound above me. I looked back up at the ceiling, and after a moment, I could hear subtle footsteps slowly walking in the room right above me. My whole body felt like it went numb. I got up from the couch and went over to the stairs. I stood at the bottom and could hear a thumping sound resonating through the hallway. I called out my roommate's name. I knew it couldn't be him, but I was just hoping that somehow it was. After there was no reply, I started scaling the stairs and flicked on the lights to the upstairs hallway. It was empty, but the door on the far end was open. It was to my roommate's room, but I was 100% certain that I'd closed it the day he left, and I never went in there since, so there should be no reason it was open right now. My heart was pounding as I walked through the hallway and looked inside the room. It looked the same as it did when he left. Everything was clean and nothing was out of place. I then went around and checked every room upstairs and still found nothing. I didn't sleep that night and spent the next couple days on edge as I waited for my roommate to get home. I never heard those sounds after that night, or had any doors randomly open like that. At this point, I don't know what the hell happened. Maybe someone found a way in and out without me knowing, or maybe it was something else. To this day, I still don't know. I'm sure you've all heard that recently there's been an enormous data breach. 2.7 billion victims' personal information and social security numbers were stolen. This stolen personal data could allow people to gain access to your financial accounts, or even steal your identity. So now it's more important than ever to take extra measures to ensure your security. There's really no better time than now to take advantage of Aura's security service. I've been regularly sponsored by Aura for over a year now, and it's because I honestly believe their service is amazing. Aura provides continuous monitoring of your personal data and resolves any potential threats that may come up, while also preventing future threats. They also make it incredibly easy for you to use and understand everything going on with your data. With their free trial, you'll be able to have Aura scan and remove your personal data from all over the internet, including scam centers, the dark web, data brokers, and hackers. After this, Aura will set up continuous monitoring on all of your data, ensuring any issues can be resolved rapidly by notifying you the instant something comes up. When I had first signed up, Aura immediately found dozens of places across the internet that already had my personal data, including my full name and address. In just a couple minutes, Aura cleared all of it. Especially in times like these, with huge data breaches and scams happening so often, having peace of mind knowing Aura is protecting your information is above anything. By using aura.com/whispered or scanning the QR code, you can get a completely free 14-day trial, allowing you to see if your personal data has been leaked, remove that data from multiple large platforms, and securely monitor your personal identity. I highly recommend using this opportunity to find any leaked info and ensure it is taken care of and secured. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring this portion of today's video. I was camping in Utah for a small weekend getaway. It really was nothing special. I'd hiked up to a small lake and was only going to stay overnight. When I got there, it was more crowded than I was hoping for. I mean, there were two groups near the beach, so it wasn't flooding with people or anything, but it definitely wasn't quiet either. Around 5 though, both groups started packing up, and within the hour they left the area. With only an hour left of sunlight, and having the beach to myself, I quickly changed into my swimsuit and jumped into the lake. I was only in there for like 10 minutes, not too long at all, when I looked back at the campsite. The woods were calm and the sun was setting over the trees, but past the beach and a little ways into the forest, a person was watching me. They were too far for me to see much, but it was definitely a man, and they were definitely looking at me. As soon as I caught them looking, they turned their head and walked further into the trees. It was too creepy for me not to get a little shaken up. Was it just a guy from one of the groups that maybe forgot something? Or maybe a hiker that I happened to catch looking over at an awkward time? The way they were just stopped and standing there, looking directly at me, was still super unnerving. I walked back up the beach and over to my tent. I dried off and kept my head on a swivel, scanning the forest for that man. I cooked up a small meal and continued to look around for him. A whole hour passed, and there were no sightings, so I figured I was good. I stayed up fairly late, at least a couple hours after sunset, mostly looking up at the stars and resting. It sounds boring to just sit there, but it's actually really nice. After a while, I got in my tent and laid on my sleeping mattress. The hike up must have made me tired, because I fell asleep quickly. As soon as I woke up though, I felt off. I didn't know why. It was the middle of the night, and pitch black inside the tent. All I could hear were the insects chirping outside, and a calm breeze blowing against the walls of the tent. I kind of just laid there for a while, maybe like 30 seconds, as my eyes were open, but completely unable to see anything. Then my eyes started to adjust a little. I could see faint outlines of the things inside my tent, and as I moved my eyes around, they fell on the zipper. The tent flap was open, and between the opening, there was a shape. I must have stared at it for a whole 4 or 5 seconds, as my heart rate spiked, before my vision became just clear enough for me to make out a pair of eyes looking into mine. My adrenaline flooded through me, and my instincts took over. I grabbed my can of bear spray that I had laying next to me and shot it right at the opening. They yelled, and I could hear his footsteps moving away from the tent as I started tearing up and coughing. I fumbled through my backpack to get my pocket knife. Then I jumped out, fully prepared to fight for my life. But the man was gone. I didn't even know which direction he went or anything, but I didn't waste any time. I hurried to gather my things and used my handheld GPS to lead me back to the car without having to take the trail. I called police to come out and take me home, because by then my eyes were burning from the bear spray. They didn't find anything, but I don't know how much they searched. Whoever that was, and what they wanted, I honestly couldn't tell you. With the image of that guy staring into my tent burned into my head, I won't be out camping again for a long time. I work at a gas station. I'd been there for several years, and this night was one that I assumed would be like all the rest. I came in at 8 and took over for the day worker, who went home right away. The first couple hours went by quickly, as there were still customers coming in regularly to buy a few things or to pay for gas with cash. Between 11 and 12, it slowed down to where it began feeling like the shift was dragging on. I kept myself busy for another hour, or at least tried to, with stocking whatever I could find. But then I was left with the dreaded second half of my shift. It was always slow, boring, and just not enjoyable. Around 1 though, a car pulled in and parked in the spaces by the entrance door. A few other cars had come through recently, but just to get gas real quick. Very rarely would someone actually park in the spots and come into the store this late into the night. I stood up straight and tried to rub the tired look off my face, expecting them to come in. A couple minutes went by though, and they didn't. I leaned over the counter and looked out the glass door, but couldn't really see anything. The reflections on the door were blocking any way for me to see inside their car. Maybe they were just taking a break from a long drive. I didn't bother caring too much about it. I sat back and pulled up my phone. I spaced out, reading through random articles and whatnot for probably 20 or so minutes. During that time, I never heard anything or saw anything. But eventually I looked up from my phone and my heart almost stopped. There was a guy inside the store, standing in one of the aisles and looking right at me. His eyes darted away as soon as I saw him. This guy looked like he was mid-40, with a dark jacket on and a scruffy beard. I never saw or heard him enter, so how the hell did he get in? While my mind was racing, I just watched as the man kept walking around, glancing over at me a few times to see if I was looking, like he was planning to do something as soon as I looked away. Then, after just 30 seconds, he suddenly hurried toward the front door and ran outside. I got up and ran to look out. This was when I noticed the car was still there, but the guy walked right past it and just out to the road until I could no longer see him. I immediately went to the cameras to see how he got in and figure out what was going on. It only took me a minute to find the footage of him slowly and quietly getting out of the car, then going to the back of the gas station. There were no cameras back there, but those doors were never locked since the gas station was technically always open anyway. What's really odd is that there were 15 minutes between the time he went around to the back to the time he walked out onto the sales floor. Police came to help me investigate, ultimately finding the car he left to have been a stolen vehicle from months ago. They didn't know anything about the guy or his motives. Sneaking around though, he clearly had something else intended for that night, and I think I was really lucky that for one reason or another, he decided not to go through with it. This was a long time ago, when I was 13. It was summer. I spent pretty much all day playing on my PS3 or watching whatever was on TV. Sometimes I'd go outside or hang with some friends, but it was raining this day, so I was hunkered down inside. My dad always worked until 10, and my mom was a nurse, so her schedule was all over the place. Most of this day, I was playing on the PS3, but around 7-ish, I went to the kitchen to make food. While I was in there, a knock came at the front door. I didn't really want to answer, and as a kid, I was always nervous when someone was at the door. So I waited a minute and tried to just be quiet until they left. After they knocked several more times though, I snuck over to the door and looked out the peephole to see if maybe it was a neighbor or someone else I knew. I was really confused though, and kind of alarmed to see a police officer. He was standing on our porch, looking around and waiting for me to answer, and now I felt like I had to. I opened the door. It was still cold and rainy outside, and the officer was drenched. Being a kid, my eyes were immediately drawn toward the gun on his hip, and overall, I just felt scared or like I was in trouble. He asked my name, then reassured me that everything was okay and I didn't have anything to worry about. He then smiled, as if trying to keep me calm, but his teeth were noticeably rotting and yellow, which then got me to notice how overall unkempt he looked. Like, usually cops were well put together, so this was really off-putting. He definitely noticed my hesitation though, because he tried to speed up the conversation, saying he needed to search the home. I was terrified and confused, but I knew something was wrong, and that's when I noticed that there was no police car by my house. Especially with it raining, all these red flags piled up, and just as he was starting to step forward, I slammed the door and locked it. He didn't even try to say anything else. He immediately slammed something against the door, hard enough to shake the entire door and push me back a little. Thinking the door would give out, I ran to the home phone and dialed 911. I was freaking out so much, I'm surprised the operator even understood a word I said. The guy outside didn't give up the whole time though, and was even there still, banging on the door when the actual police showed up. I heard him trying to convince them he was a real cop, but obviously that didn't go well. He was taken in, and initially my parents didn't tell me much about the charges, probably for my own safety. But a few years later, they told me that during the interrogation, the man admitted to attempting to kidnap me. Had I been any more trusting, I don't know where I'd be right now. My name is Leo, and I work for a pizza shop in my small town. I don't do deliveries or anything, but I do mostly everything there is to do inside the shop. I make pizzas, organize the stations, clean, and get all the closing tasks done every night before I leave. My interactions with customers is usually pretty minimal, since we have a few high school kids to take orders and everything, but they're only scheduled until 11 on weekdays. The shop closes at 12:30, so any orders or customers that come in after that, I have to take care of. This was a regular Monday shift. Everything went smoothly for the most part, and at 11 my coworker left, so it was just me to close up. It's usually really slow, so I started the cleanup process. About a half hour before closing, a call came in. Praying it wasn't for a last-minute order, I picked up the phone. I said my generic "thanks for calling, how can I help you" line, and right after I finished, there was a quiet pause. Then they hung up. I put the phone down and said a few choice words, thinking it was a prank call from a couple immature kids. I went back to the kitchen where I was cleaning, but not even 30 seconds later, I heard the bell ring by the door. The timing was annoying, but I put everything back down and walked back to the front. A guy was now standing at the counter. He had a heavy coat on and a black beanie over his shaggy hair. His eyes were what really put me off, though. He had dark circles and bags, like he hadn't slept in days, yet his eyes were wide open. How can I help you?" I said, standing a couple feet from the counter. "I'd like to place an order right now." The way he said it was odd, and it very obviously told me that something was wrong with him. I said okay and asked what he wanted, but it almost seemed like he wasn't expecting me to say that. His eyes just continued to hold this disturbing stare at me as he struggled to respond. I looked away out of uncomfort, but my eyes fell on his hand that was partially out of his jacket pocket. He was holding a knife, like a typical kitchen knife. I think he was trying to hide it, but I could see the handle in his hand, and part of the blade was sticking out of his pocket. I felt my stomach drop and blood rush from my face, almost like I was gonna faint. I looked back up, and his eyes were still staring at me, but his face was stiff and emotionless. The sound of the door opening made both of us jump, and both of us looked over. It was some other random customer walking into the shop, and they immediately seemed to realize something was wrong. They stopped in place, stumbling over a few words, before the guy by the register suddenly walked past him and out the door. I used the phone to call 911 and tried to explain to the other customer what had happened. We also watched out the window as the guy got into his car and sped out of the parking lot. That was the last we saw of him, though. What I think happened was he parked outside the shop and watched in the window as he called us. Once he saw that it was me answering the phone, I guess he knew I was alone, so that's when he walked in. If not for the random customer walking inside in that moment, I don't know what would have happened. He was clearly insane and armed with a kitchen knife, so it couldn't have been good. Since then, I still haven't seen him come back, and I really hope I never do.